Before, I lived entirely by reason. I was an atheist believing in science, money, and the ability to control everything. I was always proud that I didn't need faith or prayer to live. My life was based on rationality, planning, and relentless effort. Every decision was carefully considered. Every step was based on knowledge and experience. In my eyes, stories about God or miracles were just fairy tales or comfort for the weak. My life seemed perfect. A stable job, a happy family, healthy children, close friends, and all future plans were clear and measurable. I didn't have much to worry about, and the feeling of controlling everything brought absolute peace of mind. Every morning when I woke up, I felt the normal rhythm of life. Children running around, my wife's laughter, a busy but stable job. I used to think that happiness was the result of effort and reason, not of magic or faith. Then one day everything changed. My child began to show strange symptoms. Prolonged fatigue, unexplained pain, and poor appetite. At first I just thought it was a normal sickness. Children get tired, maybe due to a change in weather or school pressure. I told myself, it's okay, my child will surely get better. But after a few weeks, the condition not only didn't improve, but got worse. Worry began to creep in, like invisible threads tightening around my heart. During a routine checkup, the doctor looked at me with a serious expression and said words that left me stunned. Your child has cancer. This is a terminal illness, and we cannot guarantee a full recovery. The world I had built on reason suddenly collapsed. Everything I had been proud of, every plan, every effort, suddenly became meaningless. I felt depleted of all resources, as if I was standing on the edge of an endless abyss with no support. I felt the smallness and helplessness of humanity for the first time in my life. Reason, which I had once trusted absolutely, was now completely powerless against the force of the disease. I looked at my child lying in the hospital bed with innocent eyes that didn't understand what was happening, and a feeling of fear overwhelmed me. I was not only worried about my child's health, but also about the future, about everything we had built. In that moment, I realized that there are things beyond human control. I, a person who had once been so confident in absolute reason, now had to confront something that human knowledge and strength could neither explain nor intervene in. A feeling of despair began to creep in, but at the same time, it opened a boundary in my soul, a boundary between reason and faith, between confusion and hope, between despair and the need to seek something beyond myself. I sat silently by my child's bed, watching every weak breath, wondering if there was a miracle that could save us. Before, I had never prayed or sought help from any higher power. But this time, reason was no longer enough, and my heart, for the first time, began to long for something beyond human reach. From that moment, the journey from atheism to faith began. It didn't happen immediately. There was no bright light or thunder, but a gentle yet challenging feeling. I had to confront despair, look straight into fear, and seek a light, however small, in the dark night. Right after hearing the bad news from the doctor, sleepless nights followed one another, stretching on indefinitely. I sat by my child's bed, the light of the hospital room casting a glow on the small face with its expressions of fatigue and pain. Each of my child's weak breaths was like a dagger piercing my heart. Inside, a haunting question repeated itself. Why my child? Why now? I searched my memory for signs I might have missed, for wrong decisions I could have avoided, but there were no answers. Everything I had once believed in, knowledge, money, social status, long-term plans, became meaningless in the face of this terminal illness. I felt small and powerless. Reason, which I had placed my complete trust in, was now utterly helpless. I tried to appear calm in front of my family, but inside, fear and despair crept in with every step, not giving me a moment of peace. My wife struggled to smile, and my children were carefree, not knowing what was happening. I looked at them and felt even weaker, more helpless. The long nights became voids in my soul, where confusion and suffering intertwined, making my heart ache with every beat. I began to question life, the meaning of happiness, and what I had once considered certain. Before, I believed that humans could solve all problems on their own with intellect and effort. But now I saw that there are events beyond our control, which humans cannot withstand alone. For the first time, I wondered if there was a higher power, a being who could guide me through this storm. Before, the idea of God or a miracle made me sneer, but now, in the dark night of despair, it became a thought that crept in, full of urgency. A desire to seek help from an external source began to rise. Not because I was weak, but because I knew that human strength is limited. For many long nights, I sat by my child's bed, watching them breathe, listening to their heartbeat, and telling myself, there has to be a way, there has to be a miracle. Every night was a test for faith and hope. I no longer knew if I could trust science or reason enough. I began to think about faith, about the possibility of the supernatural, even though I had never believed it before. My restless sleep became a time for my mind to dialogue with itself. Between reason and faith, between fear and hope, between despair and the desire to find light. I clearly felt that if I didn't seek a higher power, I would be swallowed by this storm. My heart was both afraid and longing for salvation, a ray of light in the endless night. During those long nights, I learned something important. Sometimes it's in despair that people begin to see things beyond their capabilities. And for the first time, I opened my heart, even if just a small crack, to the possibility of a higher power, something I had previously ignored. I began to whisper to myself, if there is something that can save my child, if there is a God who can guide us through this storm, please appear. And it was this moment, the moment of ultimate despair, that was the first step that led me on a journey I had never imagined, the journey from atheism to living faith. Day after day, I felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss where helplessness and fear mingled together. Every morning when I woke up, I had to face a heavy worry. Could my child endure any more? Would today be a step forward or a step back in the treatment process? My child's laughter and innocent words were more fragile and precious than ever, but at the same time, they also emphasized the fragility of life. I followed every instruction from the doctor, performed every treatment method, every test, every injection, every nutritional regimen. But every time the test results came back with uncertain parameters, the feeling of helplessness poured over me like a fierce wave. I told myself, I've done everything I can, so why isn't it getting better? The advice from my friends, be strong, trust in science, your child will get better, now seemed like faint echoes, not strong enough to reassure my heart. I began to realize a painful truth. Science, no matter how wonderful, has its limits. Humans can do many things, but they still can't control everything. The algorithms, data, and advanced treatment methods became meaningless in the face of the disease's power. For the first time in my life, I felt my smallness, fragility, and clear limitations. In my ultimate despair, I began to reconsider faith, something I had previously considered meaningless, fairy tales for the weak. I asked myself, could it be that faith, something completely irrational in the eyes of reason, was the only salvation in times when all human strength was powerless? The thought was both strange and frightening, but also appealing, like a faint ray of light in the dark night. I remembered the peaceful days before, when I believed that everything was under control. I believed that with reason and effort, I could predict and adjust to every situation. But now all those beliefs were shaken, knocked off their foundation. I stood before the reality that there are events, challenges beyond human capability. And it was at this moment that my heart, which had been hardened by reason, began to seek help from somewhere higher, a power that was not human. The long nights became a time for me to contemplate, to dialogue with myself. I asked myself, if a being with power beyond reason exists, could he save my child? Is there a place to put my faith, however small, when all human paths are dead ends? From these thoughts, a strange feeling appeared, both fear and hope, both doubt and a strong urge to open my heart. Standing on the edge of the abyss, I understood that I had no other choice but to seek faith. For the first time, I realized that faith is not something for the weak. On the contrary, in despair, it is the way for people to overcome their own limitations. I still didn't know what would happen, but a part of my heart whispered, maybe there is a God who can guide us through this storm. That moment marked the first turning point. From an atheist of absolute reason, I began to realize that there was a power beyond human capability, and perhaps that was the only place my child and I could find hope. The storm hadn't passed yet, but I had learned to look straight into the abyss without complete fear. Instead, I began to open my heart to the possibility of the supernatural, a beginning for the journey from despair to living faith. One night, when the hospital room was quiet except for my child's weak breaths and soft whimpers, I sat by the bed, my heart pounding, my soul filled with fear. Before me was the harsh reality. My child was fighting an illness that my reason could never have imagined. I felt so helpless that I almost wanted to collapse. In that moment, a strange thought flickered. If you exist, God, please save my child. The prayer was clumsy, small, like a silent breath, falling into the quiet space of the room. I had never prayed, never believed in the existence of a supernatural being. Before, I always believed that everything could be solved by reason, science, and human effort. But now all of that became meaningless in the face of the pain and danger my child was going through. The prayer floated away as if it didn't exist. I didn't expect anyone to hear, but in that very moment, a strange feeling appeared. A vague, gentle peace crept into my heart, preventing fear from completely dominating me. I felt that I wasn't entirely alone. For the first time in my life, I experienced the feeling of being touched by a high presence. However faint, but so vivid, so close. In the minutes that followed, I sat silently, just listening to my child's breathing and the stillness around the room. There was no bright light, no loud noise, but something made me believe that I was no longer alone in this storm. My mind, which was full of doubt, began to open a small crack, a crack for faith to creep in. That night, I stayed up all night, watching my child's every small movement. I realized that despite the weak prayer, despite not really knowing what to do, the very act of uttering that prayer had changed me. It didn't solve the illness, but it began to heal my soul. I no longer felt completely desperate. A vague ray of hope had appeared, a belief that a higher power might exist and be listening. That night in the small room, I realized that there are things that exist beyond human understanding. A strange, faint presence came close to me, awakening the sleeping faith in my heart. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. From this moment on, I was no longer standing alone against the storm. The next day, while my child was still tired but stable, I no longer felt completely drowned in despair. I began to observe the small signs around me, the doctor's advice, the encouraging looks from my relatives, the things that seemed like coincidences. They all became more meaningful. I realized that perhaps the thing I had previously called meaningless, faith, was now beginning to guide us, opening a path that reason could not see. For the first time, I admitted, I wasn't seeking something miraculous just to escape the pain, but I was learning to open my heart, to surrender my fear and helplessness to a God I had never believed in before. The clumsy prayer in the night was not just a plea for my child, but also the beginning of a new journey, a journey from atheism to living faith, where hope and grace began to creep into our lives step by step. In the days after that clumsy prayer, I still faced worry and fear every time my child had to go through tests or pain. But then, small things began to appear. Signs that I would have previously considered coincidences now gradually became miraculous signals. One morning, while talking to the doctor, he mentioned a treatment method I had never thought of. It sounded normal, but it came at the exact moment I was completely stuck and didn't know what to do next. I looked into his eyes, felt his sincere concern, and for the first time I saw in that scientific advice a subtle guidance, like an invisible hand pointing the way. Then a friend sent me an encouraging text message, reminding me that I wasn't alone. The message wasn't an obvious miracle, but it awakened hope in me, that there are always people willing to be with me, to share my worries, and to pray with me. I realized that in despair, love is also a way God shows his presence. Another day, I happened to open social media and read a Bible verse. Before, those words were just literature or philosophy to me, but now every word seemed to touch my heart, reminding me that there is a God who always listens and cares. I couldn't explain why that Bible verse appeared exactly when I needed it, but a deep part of my heart began to believe that this was no coincidence. Each of those small events, little by little, became faint lights in the dark night of despair I was going through. I still had doubts, still hesitated, but at the same time, a new feeling appeared. Faith was no longer something distant or theoretical. It became an experience, a personal experience that I could feel in every moment. This faint light didn't immediately dispel my fear, but it was enough for me to realize that a superior power was walking with me. I began to pay more attention to the signs around me, the small opportunities that I had previously ignored. I learned to receive every moment, every small signal, as a reminder that we were not alone on this journey. In the quiet evenings by my child's bed, I sat silently, listening to my child's breathing and feeling peace creep in. Even though I didn't completely understand, even though there was still doubt, that faint light began to open a new path, the path from despair to faith, from loneliness to hope, from doubt to living faith. That night, I realized something important. Faith is not just for those who are ready to accept it. It can appear in the most hardened souls, in people who once denied the existence of God, when they confront the limits of human strength and feel the fragility of life. That faint light was not grand, but it was enough for me to keep going, believing that a higher power was watching over, guiding and walking with us on the journey of healing and hope. From that moment, every coincidence was no longer random. I began to record them, contemplate them, and learn how to receive faith, a faith that was not yet complete, still fragile, but enough to light the first spark in the dark despair of my soul. After a week immersed in worry and fragile hope, a close friend invited me to a small prayer group. At first, I felt hesitant and cautious. I had never stepped into a religious space, had never believed in the presence of God, and had always relied on reason to solve everything. But inside, a very fragile part of me was still searching for hope. When I entered the small room, I saw simple, sincere people gathered together, praying and sharing. There was no bright light or grand sound, just a quiet silence mixed with whispered prayers. But that very atmosphere made the space warm and intimate. During the meeting, a mother stood up and told the story of her child's miraculous healing, a child who had a terminal illness like mine. Her voice was trembling but full of faith, her eyes shining strangely. I looked at her, and my heart was suddenly moved. For the first time, faith was no longer an abstract theory, but a lived experience, something that could touch my reality. Each story shared in the group was like a piece of hope. One person talked about a miraculous recovery after months of despair. Another shared about the comfort that came from prayer, from the love of the community, from the deep feeling of not being alone. I sat quietly, feeling both shocked and a strange warmth spreading through my soul. Every word seemed to awaken a sleeping part of my faith, making me begin to realize that a miracle doesn't just exist in other people's stories, but could happen to us too. When the group meeting ended, I stood outside looking up at the quiet night sky. I felt something indescribable, the presence of a being closer than I had ever imagined. I still didn't fully understand what was happening, but my heart knew that I had entered a new journey, the journey from atheism to living faith, where faith was not just a theory, but a real experience. In the following days, I began to observe my surroundings with a different perspective. Every piece of advice, every encouraging look, every small story seemed to contain a sign of subtle guidance. I learned to receive and give thanks for each of those small moments, and gradually I felt that faith was sprouting in my heart, strong enough to hold on to hope in the long nights that followed by my child's bed. That meeting didn't solve the illness or dispel the fear, but it opened a door, the door of living faith, of companionship, of hope that I had never experienced before. I understood that a miracle is not just the final result, but also the journey of feeling His presence in every moment, in every small gesture, and in every heart that is ready to open and receive. From that moment, I knew that I was not alone. I began to learn how to trust, not just with words or reason, but with lived experience, with the deep feeling that God was by my side, guiding and walking with us through the storm of life. The days passed full of worry and tension, and I began to realize a painful but undeniable truth. I couldn't save my child on my own. I used to believe that all problems could be solved with effort, knowledge, and careful calculation. But now, standing before my child's terminal illness, I knew that all I could do was try to care for, observe, and hope. The rest was beyond human control. One evening, as my child was writhing in pain, I sat by the bed, holding their hand tightly, and suddenly tears came out. I cried out of fear, out of helplessness, and out of all the despair that had been accumulating for so long. In that moment, I uttered a prayer that I never thought I would say. I surrender my child to you. Please take care of and guide them. Those weak words floated away in the quiet space, but immediately I felt a strange sensation spreading through my soul. A peace I had never experienced. It wasn't a peace brought about by reason or a change in the situation, but a peace that came from within, from the belief that a higher power was present, guiding and protecting my child. I began to learn to let go of all my worries, all my feelings of helplessness, all the thoughts that I had to control everything. It wasn't because I became stronger or braver, but because I realized that human strength is limited, and sometimes letting go is the only way to open your heart to receive help from a higher power. When I let go, another wonderful thing happened. I realized that strength lies in weakness. I was weak, but not alone. I didn't control everything, but I could trust in His guidance. The despair that had clung to my heart gradually gave way to faith, to hope, and to patience. In every moment I sat by my child's bed, I learned to observe the small signs. My child sleeping better, their eyes lighting up, their smile appearing, even if just for a moment. Each of those small changes was like a sign to me that God was with us, caring for us, and bestowing grace in every moment. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. On the contrary, it's a way for me to commit more deeply, to commit with faith rather than fear. I learned to live in the present, to surrender all my anxieties, and to open my heart to every miracle, however small. That faith grew stronger day by day, strong enough to replace despair, strong enough to hold on to hope in the long nights by the hospital bed. I understood that every person in life has limitations, but there is an infinite God who is always ready to guide those who know how to let go and trust. And in that moment, I realized sometimes the greatest strength is not controlling everything, but trusting in His power and walking in His guidance. From this moment, my journey of faith officially began. A journey where faith was no longer a theory, but became a vivid lived experience, one day at a time, one step at a time. I learned to let go, to trust, and to realize that even in weakness, a person can find true strength. After the days of being immersed in worry and despair, I began to notice small but meaningful changes. My child was responding positively to the treatment, even though things were happening very slowly. Small signs like my child's spirit becoming better, their eyes becoming a little brighter, or a smile appearing after the pain made my heart flare up with hope. Every positive moment became a testament to God's presence, to the healing power that was silently at work. I learned to observe and cherish every detail of daily life. Waking up in the morning, when my child was breathing peacefully beside me, I felt a sense of peace filling me. The sunlight streaming through the window, shining on my child's face, also became sacred in my eyes. My child's laughter, even a small giggle, was a reminder that a miracle can happen in the most seemingly ordinary moments. These small steps were not the grand miracles I had once imagined, not an immediate disappearance of the illness or a miraculous recovery, but they were enough to make me believe that God was with us. That faith was completely different from my previous rigid reason. It was not based on evidence or logic, but on a deep feeling from my soul, from what I experienced every day. Each day that passed, I recorded the positive signs. My child eating better, sleeping more soundly, their eyes opening with hope. I realized that miracles don't always appear in big turning points. Sometimes miracles lie in the smallest details of life, and if I ignored them, I wouldn't recognize His presence. I also began to understand that God not only heals the body, but also heals the spirit, both my child's and my own. As I followed every small development, My heart worried less, and I gradually learned how to be patient, how to trust, and how to live in every present moment. The small steps became lessons in faith, believing that everything that happens has a purpose and that He is working everything out, even if I don't see the full plan. Those small steps also opened up a profound awareness. I was not alone. In moments when I was worried, desperate, or even doubtful, He was still present. And a miracle sometimes is not a sudden change, but the process of patiently walking with us through each day. This journey taught me that faith is nurtured through real-life experiences, through every moment that we think is ordinary, but is actually full of meaning. Every small step is a living testimony that God's power is always at work, and we just need to open our hearts to receive it. With each of those small steps, I learned how to live in His presence, cherish every moment, and realize that a miracle can begin with the simplest things: a breath, a smile, a peaceful day with my child. That faith gradually grew strong enough to hold on to hope and guide us through all the challenges ahead. One quiet afternoon, as my child was playing gently on the hospital bed, I suddenly burst into tears. But this time, the tears were not from worry, pain, or despair, but from realizing something incredibly profound. We were loved unconditionally. That love didn't come from the human world, didn't come from my reason or effort, but came from a high, immense, and complete God. In that moment, my soul was healed. I felt that I could forgive my past mistakes, for the times I was frustrated, angry, or blamed myself for not saving my child sooner. I understood that forgiveness not only frees someone from their mistakes, but also frees myself from the burden of the past. Tears fell, but there was no longer a feeling of pain or helplessness, but a sense of relief, a spiritual freedom I had never experienced before. In every moment of seeing my child a little healthier, seeing a smile appear on their lips, I realized that God not only heals the body, but also heals the soul. All the worries, fears, and tensions that had accumulated for so long seemed to disappear, giving way to deep gratitude and joy. I began to see that every challenge, every suffering could become a means to open my heart and realize His love. Those tears of forgiveness were also an important lesson. I learned to see and cherish life, to learn to recognize miracles even in the smallest things. I realized that every moment my child was healthy, every smile, every peaceful breath was a testament to God's power and love. The world seemed to become brighter, more profound, when my soul was freed from fear and despair. I also learned that forgiveness is the key to receiving blessings and miracles. When I forgave myself, others, and what had happened, I was no longer bound by hatred or resentment. I could love completely, open my heart to receive wonderful things, and trust that no matter how painful the past was, He was still guiding our every step. In this moment, I felt deeply that faith was no longer an abstract theory. It became a lived experience, a spiritual experience, strong and transformative. I looked at my child and saw the light of hope, peace, and love spreading. Those tears were not a sign of weakness, but a sign of liberation, of spiritual growth, and of a faith that was growing every day. I realized that sometimes the greatest miracle is not the immediate healing of an illness, but the healing of the soul, the ability to forgive, to love, and to trust completely. And it is that healing that leads to solid steps on the journey of faith, making me realize that God is always present, always loving, and always healing, both body and soul. One quiet evening, when everything around was submerged in darkness, I sat by my child's bed, praying in silence. There were no more clumsy words, no more doubt mixed with fear. I just opened my heart and uttered a prayer. Please be present in our lives. Please guide me and save my child. In that moment, a feeling of peace flooded my soul. There was no bright light, no strange sound, but my entire body felt as if it was wrapped in a warm and certain presence. All the fear, all the despair that I had carried from the first days of hearing about my child's illness gradually disappeared. Instead, there was a deep realization of God's unconditional love and power. I felt that faith was not a theory or a distant philosophy that I had once scorned. Faith is a lived experience. It is the feeling of His guidance, protection, and companionship in every moment. In that sacred moment, I saw clearly that every step, every decision, every difficulty was in His plan. I no longer worried about the future because I knew He held everything in His hands. This feeling also opened up a new perspective on life for me. I realized that a miracle does not necessarily appear in the form of sudden events or feats beyond rational ability. A miracle can be the peace in the soul in the middle of a storm, the strength to let go of worry, the ability to forgive myself and to love those around me. From this spiritual moment, I understood that true faith not only saved me, but also saved my child. It helped me look at my child not just with worried or fearful eyes, but with a heart full of hope and love. I realized that even in challenges that seemed impossible to overcome, His presence was still there, guiding and supporting us. That moment changed everything in me. I no longer felt helpless or desperate. I began to live with an open heart, with a firm belief that no matter what happened externally, we were being supported by an invisible but powerful force. Each day that passed, I learned to feel that presence, learned to live in peace, and realize that every experience, however difficult or painful, can lead to solid steps on the journey of faith. From this spiritual moment, I understood that a miracle is not just the final result, but also the journey, the every moment of being guided and embraced by His love and power. And it is this lived experience that makes me realize that faith, hope, and love are never lost. They are just waiting to be opened up to, recognized, and cherished. From that profound spiritual moment, I began to realize that life could be lived completely differently. Before, I often went through the days automatically, busy with work and worries, and forgot the true value of each moment. But now every day has become vivid, meaningful, and full of hope, thanks to God's guidance. I began my mornings with a simple prayer. Thank you for giving us a new day. Please guide our every step and bestow peace on our souls. I learned to surrender all my worries, all my fears, and my helplessness to Him, instead of carrying it all alone. This doesn't mean the challenges disappeared. The pain, pressure, and fatigue are still present. But now I have a firm belief that He is with me and guides me, and that is what gives me the strength to overcome. Living in grace is not an instant miracle, but a step-by-step journey. I learned to observe and feel His presence in every detail of life. My child's smile, the sunlight streaming through the window, a peaceful breath, and even difficulties as a reminder of patience and trust. I realized that even in what seemed like the smallest things, He is at work, guiding and bestowing miracles. Besides that, I learned to love and forgive more. Before, I used to hold on to hurts, grudges, sometimes unconsciously. Now I realize that forgiveness is not only about freeing others, but also about freeing myself. Each time I forgave, my heart felt lighter, my soul more peaceful, and my relationships with those around me became warmer and deeper. What's special is that I saw the miracle didn't stop with my child. When I lived in grace, sharing hope and love, those around me also began to feel that light. I saw faith spread through loving gestures, encouraging words, and even silent but warm moments. This made me understand that living in grace is a way to become a bridge for miracles to reach others. Every step in grace is a lived experience, a lesson in patience, trust, and gratitude. I learned not to rush, not to impose outcomes, but to believe that everything is guided according to His plan. And in every moment, I realized that true happiness doesn't come from controlling everything, but from surrendering, from faith, and from peace in the soul. Now, every day of my life is an opportunity to live more fully, to love more, to trust in God's power. I realize that living in grace is the very way to experience a miracle, the way to know limitless love, and the key to opening up a life of true meaning and happiness. Looking back on the road I have traveled, I realized that most of the burdens in my heart came not only from the pain caused by others, but also from the mistakes and self-blame that I had never let go of. There were wounds I held on to tightly, as if keeping them would help me not forget the lesson. But in reality, they only hardened my heart and exhausted my soul. I started praying for the people who had hurt me, not to accept what they did, but so that I could be free. Each prayer was like untying an invisible knot in my heart. I realized that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, but stopping the past from holding my present hostage. Then I also learned to forgive myself. This, I realized, was much harder than forgiving others. I had tormented myself for my mistakes, for my impulsive decisions, for my moments of weakness. But when I looked at the cross, I knew that God had forgiven everything. If He had washed away my sins, my continued self-punishment was just a rejection of that forgiveness. The day I truly let go, a feeling of relief enveloped me. It was like shoulders that had been hunched over were suddenly lifted, and I could take a deep breath. My heart became softer, more peaceful, and gradually love began to fill it again. I no longer looked at people from the past with eyes of resentment, but with compassion, because I too had made mistakes like them. And I understood. Forgiving and being forgiven is one of the greatest miracles of grace. In the months after the event, I realized that I was entering a completely new phase. My child began to recover, slowly but surely. Seeing their eyes open brighter each day, hearing their giggles after long silences, my heart felt soothed. No more sleepless nights filled with worry. Now I could sit by their side, tell them gentle stories, and eat a complete meal with them. I began to cherish every small moment. A clear morning, a steaming cup of hot coffee, the sound of birds singing outside the window, all became priceless gifts. In the past, I often let them pass by unnoticed, always rushing after big things, thinking that happiness had to come from great achievements. But now I understood that a miracle is sometimes just seeing the dawn after a long, dark night. I learned to thank God not only when I received what I wanted, but also when the road ahead was still full of unknowns. I realized that grace is not just in the outcome, but in the very journey of being alive and being loved. Every breath, every step, every hug was a reminder that I was still here, not just to exist, but to truly live. In the afternoons, my child and I often walked in the park. Holding that small hand in mine, I felt like I was holding an entire world. Sometimes we didn't say anything, just walked silently under the trees, listening to the rustling leaves and the whispering wind. In those moments, I knew that life had become different. No longer weighed down by the past, no longer haunted by old wounds. I was living with a grateful heart, ready to embrace each new day as a gift. My life has changed, not because all the problems have disappeared, but because God has changed the way I see, feel, and live. And that is more precious than anything else. There was a time when I thought my life would forever be in darkness. And if I was lucky enough to get out, I would just want to live quietly, keeping the peace for myself. But then, when that peace truly came, I realized one thing. Peace is only truly complete when it is shared. Light is only brilliant when it spreads. And I, who was once saved, could not keep my story in silence. The first time I shared my story, my heart trembled. I was afraid that others wouldn't believe, afraid of being judged, afraid they would think I was exaggerating or seeking attention. But I still spoke. I talked about my darkest days, about the moment I stood between life and death, and about the moment God touched me, pulling me out of the abyss. I told it not for anyone to pity me, but for them to see that miracles still exist. Strangely, when I dared to open up, many people also began to tell their stories. One person said, "Hearing you, I dared to believe that I could also be saved." Someone else cried and held my hand, whispering, "I thought I was suffering alone, but now I know God is still here." Those responses made me understand that my story was not just a memory, but a lamp lighting the way for someone who was lost. I started sharing more, with family, friends, colleagues, and even strangers I met online or at a chance meeting. I didn't try to convince anyone to believe. I just told my truth, the truth that the light had found me, and that light could find them too. Not just with words, I learned to share through actions. A gentle word of comfort, a hug when someone was crying, a hot meal for a homeless person on the street, a timely message to someone in need. Each small act, when done with love, has more power than I ever imagined. I realized that some people don't need to hear about faith right away. They just need to feel true love, and from there, their hearts will gradually open. Once I met a woman sitting absently in the park, her eyes as vacant as mine had been years ago. I just sat next to her, not saying much, just listening. When we parted, I left her a card with a few Bible verses. Months later, she found me and said, "That day I was going to end my life, but your words in that little card made me stop." I understood that sometimes a small act can save a life. The more I shared, the more my own faith was strengthened. I wasn't always strong. There were still days of fatigue and doubt. But every time I retold the story of how God saved me, I was reminded I was pulled out of the abyss, and He is still with me. The light didn't just radiate from me to others, but it also reflected back, warming me. Now I understand that the journey of faith doesn't end at the moment of being saved. That's just the beginning. The life I received is a gift that cannot be kept to myself. I want to live like a small lamp, not brilliant and dazzling, but enough for someone in the dark to realize that there is still a road ahead and the light is still waiting. There were nights when I thought the darkness was eternal. The wounds, losses, and pains seemed to pull me into a bottomless abyss. I believed that life was just a series of dark days, where hope had long been dead. But then, in the silence of despair, I realized one thing. His light never goes out. That light doesn't always shine brilliantly, but sometimes it's just a small ray that creeps through the crack of a closed heart. I realized that light is still there, still patiently waiting for me to come back, even when I turned my back and walked away. And when I began to open my heart just a little, He walked in, gently, but strong enough to rekindle faith. I remember the times I thought I had completely collapsed, but then a surprising phone call, a Bible verse I happened to read, or a warm smile from a stranger on the street. All were like small points of light that connected, forming a chain of light that led me out of the dark night. I understood that miracles don't just happen in ancient Bible stories. Miracles are still happening today, right in everyday life. He didn't promise that life would be without difficulties, but He promised that I would never have to walk through the darkness alone, and that promise became a smoldering fire within me. Despite all the storms outside, sometimes His light appeared like a gentle breeze, soothing a heart full of worry. Sometimes that light was as strong as the dawn, dispelling all the darkness. But no matter what, that light is always real, and always enough. I learned that faith is not about never doubting, but about daring to keep going even when you don't see the whole path ahead, because you know the light will show you the way. Today, looking back, I no longer see darkness as an unconquerable enemy. Instead, I see darkness as the night sky, where the stars, which are miracles, can shine most clearly. Life is full of grace and light, and if you are in a dark room with a heavy heart, please don't think that the door is closed forever. Try to open your heart just once. Try to pray just once, however clumsy or hesitant. Believe that a miracle can happen, because I am a testament that it is true. His light never goes out, and it can guide you through every challenge, no matter where you are, no matter how far away from Him you feel. And if you are reading these words today, consider it an invitation. Don't give up. Don't let the darkness convince you that hope is dead. Just a small ray of His light is enough to shatter the whole night. He is still waiting, still loving, and still wants to lead you home. This life may still be full of challenges, but when you know that His light never goes out, you will no longer walk alone. You will learn to see hope even in the middle of darkness. You will know that whenever you are tired, you just need to look up, and that light will lead you back. If you are going through dark days, don't suffer in silence alone. Start with a prayer, today, right now. And if this story touches your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Because light is not meant to be kept for yourself, but to be spread, so that one day the whole world will be lit by His love.